you were chosen for one another. And so when you realize that, I recently heard a quote, and I don't know who said it, but I'm taking it forever and ever. And it simply says this: love keeps you going, hope moves your feet. Love keeps you going, hope moves your feet. If there was a theme to Courtney's life, it was that.
This is NICU Babies Parent Support with Kathryn Whitaker, a podcast from Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit that provides free personalized support, resources, and community before, during, and after a NICU stay. My conversations here focus on education and personal stories with medical and hospital professionals, counselors, therapists, and NICU moms and dads from across the country. So whether you're preparing for a NICU stay, you're currently there, or you're months and years past your stay, you belong here. The NICU is hard. We're here to help. I'm your host, Kathryn Whitaker, the mom of 6 children, including my very own NICU baby, and I'm so grateful that you're here. Howdy, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. So, small disclaimer, I often get the chance to visit with people here on the podcast that I know in real life, and I absolutely adore. Occasionally, I get the chance to visit with someone not only that I know well, but that I know intimately and that are very, very dear friends of mine. And that is who you get to hear from today. Mary is the person that I call when life is burning down and I need good advice. She is also the person that I call when I need to celebrate a big joy and a big win. And she is able to be present in both of those places and everything in between. I know that you're going to love our conversation today. We do talk about death and dying in today's episode. So if you're not ready for that, hit pause and come back and join us next time. But I will say this whole season is wrapped around this one word, and it's hope. And I know that after my conversation with Mary today, that you are going to have a heavy pour of hope in your life. She has a way of framing her story in a way that makes you feel seen, but also makes you feel like this is not going to be my life forever. This hard place will not always hurt this bad. And this is what it can look like on the other side. And so if you find yourself in a place where you are in desperate need of hope, listen to this episode. My guest today is my very dear friend, Mary Lenaburg. She is a mentor, accompanying women through the twists and turns of life. I can attest to that. She's also a speaker, an author, and a special needs mom. Her award-winning memoir, Be Brave in the Scared, was followed by her second book, Be Bold in the Broken. Mary speaks about redemption, restoration, child loss, grief, addiction, and trauma. And so with that, let's chat. Well, I mentioned in my intro that I often get the chance to visit with people that I love and adore, but I don't often get the chance to visit with people that know me super well and could embarrass me in public, but that are just amazing human beings that I trust with the hardest parts of my story. So, Mary, thank you for being here.
I'm just so honored that you asked me. I'm excited for this conversation, and I promise I will not embarrass you. I will do my very best.
Today's all about you, so I don't have anything to worry about. So I mentioned when I was introducing you to everyone that was listening is that you're a special needs mom, but I want to rewind back, 30-ish years. Those 3 decades, that's hard to believe.
Yeah.
You had had a miscarriage and then you were pregnant with Jonathan, who's your oldest. So this was your second live birth.
Yes.
And I'm assuming everything went well with the birth. I don't know. I've never asked you about that day. Did everything go well with the birth? Were there
It
any?
was a beautiful birth. It was 5 hours of labor from the time my water broke till the time she came into the world. It was a gift. It was a gift. That memory of that day is sacred and beautiful and awesome.
Oh, I'm so glad I asked about that day. I mean, I think in motherhood, we have moments that carry us through hard places and spaces. So I think we know that there's an opportunity for us to rest in that really beautiful moment. And then perhaps when the harder days come, you're like, I'm gonna go back to that really beautiful moment. So I'm gonna fast forward a little bit to when Courtney was 5 weeks old. What happened when she was 5 weeks old, and how did your life take maybe a very different path than what you thought?
Well, we had gathered for a big family wedding. I'm one of 8 kids. So when the family gathers, you try to if you're a woman of faith, you have a baptism or a baby naming or whatever it is. And my mom had put out the call, hey, Courtney can be baptized here at our home church in the state I grew up in Maryland. So why don't we do that? And I was like, this is great. Okay, we're going to go for my brother's wedding. We'll get the baptism. Everybody will be
Two for the
there.
price of one.
Exactly. Like, yes, mom, you're so smart. Okay. So we gathered for the baptism, and we had seen something at the wedding. Like, she had sort of like had this moment of sort of shaking. And I thought it was because, we were in the reception, the music was too loud. So I just took her out of the reception, and she was fine and nursed fine. Everything was great. And then the next day at the baptism, when the when the priest was putting the water over her head, she had kind of like this violent shake, and we thought, again, the water's cold, it's a lot going on, she's only 5 weeks old. And I calmed her right down. She kind of cried out a little bit, and I calmed her down. And then as the ceremony went on, as the liturgy went on, she went into like a full grand mal seizure. And I didn't know it was a seizure at the time, because I honestly had only seen one in my life, high school. A 5-week-old baby is a tiny little thing. And I happened to be nursing her when I did this. And so she clamps down on my breast. She curls her body around me and begins pulsating. And she starts to turn blue because her nose is against my breast. And so I moved fast. My father happened to be next to me as I was nursing her. I had covered her and everything. And he would go, oh my gosh, we've got to go now. And thankfully the baptism was over. And, so she was, in the Lord's family, and off we went to the emergency room. And I really think of that moment. It's not like it's fuzzy for me. I can recall every emotion. I can recall every fear, but there's no pain associated to it. Like, I can't remember the physical pain of that moment. And there was intense physical. I don't feel the emotional pain. For me, it's just this happened. We went to the emergency room. We showed up at the emergency room. She's still in a seizure, wrapped around my body. I am on full display for the world to see, because at that point, you're just trying to protect her airway, and I can't get her to unlatch. Walk in, and always, when I tell this story, I'm like, and Tom Selleck started walking toward me. That's how
Oh,
I
so
remember it.
people of a certain age will appreciate that. So for the younger folk that are listening, this would be like Glen Powell rolling in.
Yes, walking through of the 80s. The Glenn Powell of the 80s
Yes.
was walking toward me.
Yes.
And he and I just remember that he just looked and I looked at Jerry, and I'm like, "Oh, is he filming here?" Like, because we were at a Navy hospital, and he was a big fan of the Navy, and Jerry's just looking at me. I remember that very specifically. But he was the head of the pediatric neurology department. You want to talk about just a moment of grace. And he happened to be running the ER that day. And he saw us walk in, and he just started walking toward me, and he had 2 nurses with him, and he was calmly talking to me. I think he asked me, like, what's going on? And I'm like, this is happening. And he goes, this is what's going to happen. This nurse on this side is going to give your daughter a shot in the foot. Then we're going to take her from you when she relaxes. And this nurse on this side is going to be with you, and we're going to take good care of your daughter, and it's going to be fine. And I just remember that moment. Like, as I'm telling you this, I laugh more than I feel any other emotion. I'm just like, it really wasn't Tom Cruise. He was very nice, but it wasn't Tom Selleck. It wasn't him. And they took her away from me. So, like, they gave her a shot of Valium. He literally took her from my breast, turned around, and ran through the double doors. And like, codes were going off because she was turning blue. And I look at Jerry, and my breast is out, and the nurse comes with this ice pack, puts it right on my breast, puts her arm around me, directs Jerry to the other side, and I literally collapse. I just didn't. And I don't really have a memory of that moment. My next memory, it's literally 7 hours later. They had put us in a room in the back, and then they wheeled Courtney into that room. She had had 2 or 3 more grand mal seizures. So she did her job. She showed the doctors exactly what was going on.
Right.
We weren't crazy. We weren't, being an overprotective parent or whatever. And we spent the next 7 days in the pediatric intensive care unit of Bethesda Naval Hospital, which is now called Walter Reed Medical Center, right outside of Washington, D.C. And that 7 days changed the trajectory of our lives forever. And the first 24 hours were, is she going to live?
Mhm.
The next 24 hours were Jerry had to leave and go
We
back.
should mention that Jerry is your husband.
Jerry
Yes,
is my
this is Jerry.
husband, yes, and we were
And
active
also in the Navy
yes, we
at
were
this
active
time.
duty at the time in the Navy. He was a naval flight officer flying P-3s, and we were stationed in Brunswick, Maine. So at this time, we're at my family home in Rockville, Maryland. So that's a 12-hour drive, and we were moving. He had just gotten orders to come to Washington, D.C. for 3 years, and the moving truck was coming on Tuesday. So we thought, come down for the
Gosh,
family
Mary.
wedding. We'll go back up and leave the children. I'll take Courtney with me, but leave the toddler. Jonathan was 2.5, and let Grandma and Grandpa love on him while we move. And then Courtney had grand mal seizures, and all of a sudden we were in a different situation. And so he had to leave us. He had to say goodbye to his daughter. We didn't know if she had a brain tumor. We didn't know if there was a chromosomal issue. We just had no idea. They were just starting all of the searching. And he drove 12 hours to Maine. He moved our family while Jonathan, they let a 2.5-year-old stay in the pediatric intensive care unit with me at a
Wow.
Navy hospital. We slept in the
That's
same
when you know
bed.
it's serious, right?
That's it, when they're letting you, because they thought she was gonna, they really thought she was short for this life.
Yeah.
And he went and moved us, and then he came back. That was the most intense. Like, I had been nursing Courtney. I hadn't been able to nurse Jonathan. Things were so Jonathan was the one that had a traumatic birth, 36 hours, almost a C-section. I had gestational diabetes. I had preeclampsia. Like, all these things should have gone wrong with him. And yet he had a great, he was fine, totally fine.
Wow.
Courtney, 5 hours, natural labor. And here we are in the pediatric intensive care unit. It was
So,
crazy.
Mary, over the next couple of decades, 3 decades, really, when you say that, I know intimately, at least bits and pieces of your story and how much your life changed, but I'd like for you to give people an idea of, like, as Courtney got older, like, what was a normal day in your life as her mom and her primary caretaker, and also with a toddler who then became a teenager and a grown man? Like, what did your day-to-day life look like, Mary? Give people an idea of what that looked
It
like.
was intense. It was intense. I'm not going to lie. Courtney could not, her official diagnosis was seizure disorder, origin unknown, with global developmental delay. When she was 7 months old, we gave her a medication that she actually had an allergic reaction to, that she had a brain stem seizure. So that further damaged what was already happening. And to the day that the Lord brought her home, we never knew. We never knew why. There was no medical reason. We did genetic testing, we did everything.
Mm.
You name it at the time, that if it was available, we did it. Same answer every time. We just don't know. We just don't know. So she was wheelchair bound. She was nonverbal. So she couldn't walk. She couldn't talk. She never went the 9 to 12 months in development. And so, a 22-year-old woman who was 5'8", blonde curly hair. She was cortically blind, so she could see bright things, right? So if you were in a dark room and turned on a light in the corner, she'd look to the corner, but that was it. And when she was hungry, she sounded like Chewbacca from Star Wars. She just had this kind of keening and this moaning that she would do. She was a spicy little pepper. She had a temper, and she would hit her feet on her wheelchair when she was angry about something or didn't like something. We gave her peas like 3 times in a row and never again, because she hated peas, and she would spit them at you. So, like, she was just this little baby, but she would have seizures every single day, and they would be grand mal seizures, and she would stop breathing. So I say that with such ease, like, oh, it's fine.
Right.
We just had 22 seizures today. But when you're in it, you literally are living every single day as if it's the last day. And I didn't realize at the time, it was just normal for us. And you had this kind of, if Courtney was the blast zone, the center, right? And everything goes out from Courtney. Our marriage went through hell. Our son went through so many ups and downs emotionally, watching his sister trying to breathe and live, and in the pediatric intensive care unit, out of it, in and out for 22 years. And that leaves scars. That leaves hard things in the heart. And going through that, but he was her best protector. He would never allow anyone to look at her sideways. And the funny thing about the two of them, one of my favorite memories was when Jonathan was probably 16, 17, and it was summertime, and we would go to the mall because it was air conditioned. And Courtney loved music, right? So she loved rap music because of the beat.
I mean,
So you have two of the whitest human beings that have zero rhythm. Jonathan is rapping to his sister down the
oh,
aisle of the Gap because he had memorized the songs so we could sing them to her, and she is just laughing
oh,
hysterically, and I will never forget it as long as I live. And all the young college girls that work at the Gap, in summer, had tears in their eyes, and two of them asked for his number. I'm like, "He's only 16. We're not.
calm down, ladies.
That's not happening." They saw in him was devotion to his sister.
Yeah.
Now, that when you go through things like this, it leaves scars. When he was 18, he really struggled. He really struggled when he went to college. There was a season for about 5 years where he was in intense therapy, diagnosed with depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and we had to walk through that as a family. Now, during that time, the Lord allowed Courtney to actually be in a really good place. For 2 years, we didn't go to the hospital. That was the only 2 years in her life. We did not
Wow.
go to the hospital, and the grace was there because Jonathan needed us.
Yeah.
And so, I think back on those times, it was physically exhausting, it was mentally exhausting, it was emotionally horrific because you just didn't know if this was the last seizure that was gonna take her. You just never knew. And we had a wonderful
That's hard.
supportive, school that she went to. We had a center schools here in Fairfax County, Virginia, where there's 2 schools where kids that have trachs, are severely disabled, wheelchair bound, they have a place for them to go and to be in community and to be loved and to, have physical therapy, occupational therapy, things of that nature. So we had a beautiful support system, which is why we remained here in Virginia at the end of Jerry's Navy career. So it was hard. It was really, 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 really freaking hard.
I mean, as I'm listening to you, I'm like, I mean, I think it begs the question, Mary, and this came. I'll say this question comes from a place of the Catherine before she met you. Is that I would often see families in similar situations as yours. A child who was nonverbal clearly had physical needs that were extreme. And I remember I would look at moms like that and like I would feel pity for them. Like,
Mhm,
I'm so glad that's not me. I
mhm.
don't think I could do that. But then I met you and you have like this radiant joy. And I thought it really did give me new eyes to look at families who have children with severe medical needs because I kept thinking, "Oh, they must be ready for it to all be over, or they must be wishing it could be easier." But what I found when I met these families and these caregivers and these moms and dads is that they were really thriving in the joy. It doesn't take away from the hard part, but Mary, maybe explain to people, how did you go from this hitty sort of idea that this is I can't believe this is my life to this is my life and we are going to find joy in it. How did you do that? I think there's a lot of people that may be wondering that. This podcast is produced by Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit, but we're more than simply a podcast. Be sure to download our app in the Apple Store or on Google Play, or you can visit our website to discover all the ways that we can support you as a NICU parent at handtohold.org. You can join one of our support groups, sign up for counseling, find loss and bereavement support, request a peer mentor, or check out our educational resources and family stories. And all of that is at no cost to you.
It's a choice. It's a choice. And I don't say that lightly. I really don't say that lightly. Here's the thing.
Well, you can't say that lightly because as I listen to your story, I'm like, it comes from a place of experience.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Children are beautiful. you have kids, and it's never going to go like you think it should go. Whether your child it has different abilities or not, it's never going to go the way you think it should go. So once I let go of that, and she was probably 7 before I stopped trying to fix her. Right? We were
Mm.
constantly looking for an answer to this. And she was 7 years old, and we just finally came and had this beautiful experience where it was like, you know what? This is who Courtney is. She is perfect as she is. Nothing about this is a mistake. Now, how can we make her life and our lives the biggest, best, boldest, happiest life that we could possibly provide for her? Because this is how it's going to be. So we can either choose bitterness, and so many families have, and I get it. It's so easy to go down that path,
Yeah.
or we could choose joy, and we could maximize what we could do. And so I am naturally a pretty even-tempered, happy person, and I like a good challenge. I think God like totally overestimated what he thought I could do. And one day we're going to have a conversation about that. But like, who do you think I am, dude? Like, come on. But at the same time, he gives you helpers. There's that beautiful line that Mr. Rogers used to say, look for the helpers. Look for the
Yep.
helpers. And we were given so many helpers. And I think that's frustrating for people that don't have helpers. That's where the bitterness comes. Like they're alone. So I always encourage people, like, if you're in a church community or you're in an educational community, a school community, what have you, be a helper. Even if it's just carrying the backpack to the car so the mom can get the child in the wheelchair van, be someone that is joy to them, because you have no idea what they're going through in that exact moment, what they've been told that day at the doctor, what's been happening in their marriage, what's been happening with their job, the insurance is denied or not. I mean, just, oh my Lord, that's the whole situation.
Yeah.
We almost declared bankruptcy 3 times during her life. That's how bad it got, right? So, I mean, I get it. So we chose joy, and we started living our life differently. And we brought her out in the world. We took her to the mall. We took her to church. We took her to, I dressed her in a certain way, and I let her hair grow out. We had kept it short and a pixie for so long, and she had really, really curly hair. And we let it grow out, and she was beautiful. She was physically beautiful, and she loved people. We would go to church, and the little old ladies at church would come up to Courtney and just whisper in her ear, like, "Good morning, Courtney. We're so happy you're here." And she would lean in with her head. That was like her hug. And she would touch you like head to head, and they would just kind of press together, and they would just have a moment. And Courtney would have this big smile that was my teeth before braces, because Courtney couldn't have braces. So like this big buck tooth smile, and she would just be, oh, like, oh, hi. And people would just treat her with such respect, and because we were joyful and we were open to having people ask us questions. It was always so fun when you have the little ones, the 2-year-olds, the 3-year-olds, the 4-year-olds, who are so innocent and just don't know. And they would see Courtney in her wheelchair. And I remember this one little boy, again, at the mall. We spent a lot of time at the mall. It was air conditioned.
Hey, you do what you
We
have to
could
do.
get our steps in, and there was music and light and everything, especially when she was done with school. I remember this little boy, and he comes up to her like she can talk to him. And he's like, "That is so cool. I love the wheels on your chair. That is so cool. I keep asking my mom for one, but she won't get me one. That is so cool." And I was just like, Courtney just started laughing. And I'm
Oh,
like, "It is cool, isn't it?" And he's like, "How come she won't talk to me?" And I'm like, "Well, if you think of her brain like a muscle, and sometimes the muscle in your tummy hurts and it kind of cramps. Have you ever had that?" And he's like, "Yeah, I had a tummy ache once." And I'm like, "Well, that's what happens to her brain. And because when her brain does that, it kind of stops everything else. And so she can't talk to you." And he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry she can't talk to me." And I'm like, "It's okay, but look at her face." And she was smiling. And I said, "She talks to you with her smile." And he runs back to his mom and he goes, "Mom, the girl in the cool chair, she talked to me with her smile," at the top of his lungs. And I
oh,
thought, thank you, Lord, for that moment, because he
yeah.
saw her, and there was nothing about her that was scary. And there was nothing about her that was different. She had the cool chair with the wheels, and she talked to him with a smile. And I thought, if adults could approach this like children approach it, with the empathy and the simplicity of a child, this world would be so much a different place.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've thought often, Mary, about I never had the joy of meeting Courtney in person, but I knew you on the internet way back when, and I remember seeing how well you loved her. She had the cutest Converse shoes,
Yeah, she
and her hair always looked beautiful. And like you really, I could see like there was a lot of love there. Like you weren't trying to hide her away,
mm-mm.
and maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's because I hadn't seen families bring their child, or I hadn't put myself in a position to open my eyes to see it. But it certainly did transform me and how I see other families. And, as I look around at our neighborhood or our church or wherever I go and I see someone and a mom, and I always think of you and like how well you loved her. And I think it invited other people to love her too. So I hope that that gives some moms and dads some hope. I have to ask, Mary, what do you miss most? I know, we briefly alluded to it. Courtney passed away. Has it been 10 years?
10 years this year in December, yeah. 10
So
years.
how do you like, what do you miss most about her, Mary?
I miss the weight of her in my arms, you know? Hmm, you promised me you wouldn't make me cry.
I didn't make any promises.
I miss the weight of her in my arms. We spent a lot of time, Courtney, because she couldn't walk. You had to stretch her body. You had to manipulate her body in a way to help her hips unlock so she wouldn't be in pain. Her back was like an upside down question mark, her spine. But the surgery to straighten it was too challenging for her. They didn't feel she could make it through that surgery. So there were just a lot of things that we would do, and she would often be we had this big double chair downstairs, and she would be in the chair next to me, and I would be holding her like a small child, even though she was 5'8" and had the longest legs. But I missed she would put her head on my chest and listen like a baby, listen to your heartbeat. And after a seizure, that's the only thing that would calm her down, and she would sleep and she would
Mm,
rest in my arms, and I miss that because that connection was how I physically could love her. Like, I could say the words, "I love you," and I know she knows she was loved, but, like, to hold someone, it's kinda
yeah.
like those beautiful warrior mamas in the NICU like you. That first time you ever held Luke, like, you'll never forget it as long as you live. And Courtney passed away in my arms. She took her last breath in my arms, which was a gift to me. It wasn't something to be afraid of. It was a gift, but I miss the weight of her in my arms. I miss her laughter. Oh my gosh, when she would laugh, it would just be the very best thing that you ever heard on the planet. I swear it's what heaven sounds like. It's like this big old trucker laugh. She honked like a goose. She'd be like, haw, haw, like that, and it would just take over the room. And the one of the gifts of her life is that it simplified things. Like,
Yeah.
we didn't worry about, there's nothing Courtney could do to earn our love. She wasn't gonna be a lawyer or a ballerina or get married or have kids. She was just Courtney. And so you loved her as she was, and that's the beauty of her life, is that you just poured out that love for where you were in that moment, in that day, because you didn't know what was coming the next day. You didn't know what was gonna happen. That's what I miss.
Mary, I'm thinking about this transition in the early days of moving from this life that you thought you were gonna have, and then at 5 weeks, it drastically changed. And then 10 years ago, when she's no longer physically with you, and you come back to the life that you had all those years ago, how did you reconcile that? Like, what did life feel like? I know there was obviously grief, but your day-to-day life changed dramatically.
It's very empty. It was very empty. I'll just being totally honest. I will never forget the day after she died. They had taken her body to prepare for the funeral from the home, and it was 6 o'clock in the morning. We hadn't turned off the bed alarm. She had bed alarms for her seizures. And I hear this sort of sound that sounded like Courtney was having a seizure. And I remember getting out of bed, running downstairs, and finding my husband Jerry standing by an empty bed with her meds in
Mm.
his hands, and it was 6 AM, and he always gave her meds at 6 AM, and he was just weeping, and he was like, "I don't know what to do, like, she needs her meds," and I'm like, "No, honey, not anymore," and That's what it felt like. It was this gut-wrenching, guttural, horrible hole, and yet you still had to go on, right? We grieved hard, hard grief, and it's been 10 years, and it still comes. There'll be a day that comes and I'll see her. We kept her orange Converse because they were her favorite shoes, and they sit on in our living room, and I'll look at them and I'll be like, "Oh, Courtney needs her shoes." Like, she's still here, literally. And I'll grab the shoes, and it's almost as if I hear Courtney's voice going, "Mama, I don't need them anymore. It's okay." And I just have a moment, and I cry, and I talk to her. I talk to her every day. She's never left my heart. She's left my arms, but she's never left my heart. And the lessons that she taught us on how to live a full, big, bold, bright, brave life where there's bittersweet. I learned, Kathryn, I learned what the word bittersweet means. I live it every day. I love bittersweet, love it. But there's a bittersweet to my life that exists now that you only get when you've walked through the gates of hell, when you've stood at a burial ground and they lower your daughter's body into the ground and you have to walk away. Like, that is a special kind of hell that I never ever wish on anyone. And unfortunately, that happens to all of us. It's the one thing that's guaranteed, right? We
Yeah.
come into this world, we're going to go out of this world. So how are you
Yeah.
going to live it while you're here? And what are you going to leave behind when you go? And all Courtney left behind was love and joy. Was it hard? Yeah, but life is hard. There are things I look at you with your 6 beautiful children, and I'm like, "Yeah, I can do that." Like, I was no, that wasn't, and I look at these, one of my brothers has an autistic son. I look at him and I'm like, "Oh, wow, what would I do with that?" Was in a chair, and she didn't go anywhere. Things like that. There's always other challenges. You look around in the world, like, whew, all right, thank you, Lord. That's not what you gave me. And people
Right.
look at my life and they're just like, oh my gosh, I can't. Yeah, you can. That's the whole point.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, Mary, because I think we look at people maybe, we know our own life, right? Because we live it.
Yeah.
And then we look at someone else's life and maybe their crosses or the really hard things that they're going through, and we say, I could never. The reality is that that's not your life. This is your life. And I love, Mary, that every time I hear you speak or every time I hear you talk, is I'm reminded that yes, joy is a choice, but
Mhm.
it's also your life wasn't on pause while you had Courtney. Like you really lived, and I think that's one of the main reasons why I wanted you to be here today is because I think you remind people to live in their current joy, however that may look. And it may look hard to someone else, but it's your life and you get a choice to live it well. And I think that if there's anyone that maybe can speak some hope to a mom or a dad, I think it can be you. So if there's a mom listening, Mary, normally, I would ask people's advice, but I wanna ask for you to give people some hope. If there's a mom or a dad or a caregiver listening, and this sounds eerily similar to what their life is looking like right now,
Mhm.
maybe they're caring for a child who has a lot of medical needs. What hope do you want them to hear that you wish someone had told you?
You were chosen for this child. This child was made for you, and you were made for them. And God doesn't make mistakes. And I know not everybody that listens to this podcast might be a person of faith, but you were chosen for one another. And so when you realize that, I recently heard a quote, and I don't know who said it, but I'm taking it forever and ever. And it simply says this: love keeps you going, hope moves your feet. Love keeps you going, hope moves your feet. If there was a theme to Courtney's life, it was that. We loved her and it kept us going. And hope for a smile, hope for a day with maybe one seizure, hope for a good doctor's appointment or an encouragement from the therapist, hope that she really loved what you made for dinner and wasn't going to spit it back at you, whatever that hope is, right? Hope that that little boy will always remember the girl and the cool wheels. and it may change his life. We spent a lot of time working with medical students so that they, as they became doctors, might understand what it was like when you're talking to a mom of a multi-handicapped, medically fragile child. She is in her own lane. Ain't no other mama in that lane but her, and nobody knows her kid like she does. I don't care if he's the head of the pediatric neurology unit at the best hospital in the world. You're going to sit down and you're going to listen to her heart. Love keeps you going. Hope moves your feet. So don't ever give up hope, because life is hard for all of us. Ours was just on display for the world to see.
Mm.
And we got to choose how the world was going to look at it. And we wanted to make sure that she had her best life. And she lived her best life. And that's all we as parents can provide. We love our babies, we care for our babies. And then one day they leave us, however that happens. Able-bodied, walks off to college. You know, Courtney went home to the Lord. And at the end of the day, we wanted to make sure that we left everything on the field. There was nothing else we could have done, and we did that. And I miss her every day, and I will until the day I take my last breath. And I don't regret anything we did, because we did it with the information we had at the time that we made the decisions. And sometimes they went well, and sometimes they did not, but we did our best with what we had. So if there's a mama and a papa out there that's like, what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? This is how you're going to do it. One freaking hour at a time, one day at a time, one crisis at a time, one question at a time. You do not have tomorrow, so forget about it. You got today. So what are you going to do with today? How are you going to love today? How are you going to ask for help today so that someone else has a chance to love you and thereby their life can be changed? We as special needs mamas, we don't take help well, right? Because we know our kid really well and we don't
Yeah.
necessarily ask. And it's a very humbling thing for us to be able to say, yes, I really do need your help. And yes, my bathroom hasn't been cleaned in 6 weeks. And would you be able to do that for me? It is very humbling. But you know what? It's also really beautiful when you walk into that bathroom that your neighbor just cleaned because they couldn't think of anything else they could do to help you.
Yeah.
And like, it smells like lemons. It's beautiful. Take the help. Take the help,
Yeah.
right? Love keeps you going. Hope moves your feet.
Mary, I could visit with you for hours. I do usually, but today we're going to end it there. It's so good to hear your story through a different microphone today, and I'm hopeful that someone heard that today and maybe chooses to look at their life differently. So thank you for the gift of being you. Whew. In today's 2-minute take, I have heard Mary's story so many times. By the way, if you haven't read her book, Be Brave and the Scared, she really chronicles in much more detail and with even more joy and even more sass her life and what it looked like when Courtney entered their world, and then how things imploded, both personally for her in her marriage and then with her other son, and then what it looked like on the other side, how there was redemption at the end. And it's a fabulous read. You should absolutely get her book. She also has an audiobook, I think. But every time I visit with Mary, I think I am reminded again that even when life is that hard, there can be joy. And I didn't believe that. I thought that people were just saying that. And then I had the great privilege of becoming a friend of Mary's and meeting Jerry and knowing Jonathan and getting to know their family. And I'm like, this is legit. This is not manufactured for a book. This is not manufactured for a podcast. Like, the joy here is real. And if there's anything that I took from today, it's that joy is possible, even in the hardest of places. I love that Mary said it's a choice, but I also believe that they made the choice to share Courtney with the world. And it changes people's lives when you share your children with the world. You share your love with the world. I especially loved what she said at the end, that hope is the part that moves your feet. And so as you take a moment to hopefully re-listen to that episode, find your hope, I'm so grateful that she was one of the people that I interviewed this season, because I knew that there was no greater person to give you hope than Mary Lenaburg. So if you love today's episode, please go give us a rating over on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, share it with a friend. You can also watch us over on YouTube. That's a fun new thing that you can do, so enjoy that. But we have so much more coming this season. So if you love today's episode, don't go anywhere, because next time you're going to hear a little bit about this.
What I'm finding is like, like I was saying, like my friends text me a lot about their babies. And a lot of times, I want to say, what did your doctor say? Right?
Right.
Like, do what your doctor, because I'm not a physician. Yes, I know a lot about babies, but I think there are times where the bedside manner and those important conversations where it's like literally, okay, if this, then that, if this, then that, are so important to have with parents.